It started innocently enough. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through my phone, just passing the time after a long day. I didn't expect to find anything that day. Didn't even know I was looking for something, but there it was. A text message, a notification that would change everything. It was from Jenna, my ex. I had been broken up with her for about 3 months by then, though I hadn't fully let go. We had tried to stay friends, or at least I thought we had. She kept texting, calling, telling me that she missed me, that we could still be close. I had been naive enough to believe it. I thought we could pick up the pieces, maybe even get back together, but not in the way she'd hinted at. But that text, it wasn't just any text. It wasn't about old memories or catching up on life. It was her, sending me a photo of a sunset. I didn't recognize the background at first, but then I saw it. The telltale sign. The bench. The exact same bench where she and I had shared our first kiss. A place we had gone back to time and time again. The photo was of her sitting there, with a guy next to her. Not just any guy, but someone I had never seen before. She didn't need to say a word. The image spoke volumes. That was when the reality hit me like a sledgehammer. I sat there for a second, staring at the photo, the dark cloud of betrayal slowly suffocating any hope I had left. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to call her right away, confront her about it, but what would I say? What could I possibly say? The image was all I needed. She was already with someone else. She had moved on, but for some reason, she'd been stringing me along this whole time. I had been the fool. I texted her back, as calmly as I could. So who's the guy? I kept it simple, trying not to show how badly I was crumbling inside. I stared at the screen for a few minutes, waiting for her reply. It felt like hours. When she finally answered, the response was almost worse than the photo. She told me he was just a friend. That was the first lie. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stared at the screen, replaying the last few months in my head. I had been there for her, supportive, understanding. The guy she could lean on while she sorted her life out. She had talked to me about her feelings, about her fears, about her dreams. But this whole time, she had been seeing someone else. Maybe for longer than I realized. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what she was doing. Keeping me around as a backup while she had someone else to fill the void. I should have realized sooner. I should have seen the signs. The lack of effort, the way she would cancel plans with me at the last minute. The fact that she barely ever seemed to make time for me. And then there were those little things, like when she would text me at odd hours, just enough to keep me hanging on, but never fully committing. This was the point I hit rock bottom. And when you're at rock bottom, you're left with two choices. You either let it destroy you, or you make a decision to do something about it. I wasn't going to let it destroy me. I put the phone down and sat back on the couch, staring at the wall. My mind started to spin. I needed to do something. But what? How could I get back at her? How could I make her feel even a fraction of what she'd made me feel? There was a burning anger inside me now, a righteous fury that I hadn't felt before. I wasn't going to be a passive victim. No, I was done with that. I wanted justice, and justice would be served, whether she liked it or not. I thought about her new boyfriend for a moment, the guy in the picture. What did he have that I didn't? He was probably just some guy who didn't know how to treat her, who didn't appreciate her the way I did. The thought made me sick, but at the same time, it lit a fire in me. I was going to get back at him too, but I couldn't just confront him. That wouldn't feel right. Confrontation didn't suit me. I needed something subtle, something that would hurt, something that would make him pay in a way that he would never forget. That's when the idea came to me. It was perfect. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. The plan was simple, and I knew exactly how I was going to execute it. I didn't waste any time. It wasn't like I had to think too much about it. I knew exactly what needed to be done. I'd already gotten his name from Jenna's texts when I went back through them. It wasn't that hard to track down where he worked and what kind of car he drove. Everything lined up. The guy drove a shiny black Audi. Typical. The kind of car that screamed, "I've got money, I've got style." The kind of car that made me sick to my stomach just thinking about it. But there was something more to it. The fact that he had the nerve to park it right outside the cafe where he and Jenna would meet up. It made my blood boil. It wasn't even about the car anymore. It was about the idea of him coming into my life, taking what was mine, like I didn't exist. I didn't know him, but I didn't have to. The fact that he was with her was enough. And it wasn't like I was planning to do anything outrageous. No, this was going to be clean, calculated. I wanted to send a message. I had seen him park his car at that cafe a few times before. It wasn't far from my place, so I had a few opportunities to observe. I didn't want to rush things, didn't want to make any mistakes. I needed to wait for the right moment. A few nights later, after work, I decided it was time. I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. I grabbed my keys, slipped on a hoodie, and drove over to the cafe. It was a quiet night. Not many people were around. I parked a few spaces down, out of sight, and waited. My heart was pounding. I knew what I was about to do wasn't right, but in that moment, I didn't care. It felt justified. It felt like the only way to regain some control over this situation. I wasn't going to sit idly by while he lived the life I thought I would have had with Jenna. I watched him walk out of the cafe, laughing with her like nothing was wrong. He slid into the driver's seat of that Audi, completely oblivious. I had watched him long enough to know he always parked it in the same spot. I got out of my car, walked over quietly, and pulled out my keys. My hands were shaking, but I steadied myself. This wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a moment of strength. I approached the car from the side, where the scratches wouldn't be immediately obvious. I wasn't going to ruin his entire vehicle. No, I was smarter than that. I just wanted him to feel the pain, the cost of the emotional mess he had caused me. With a steady hand, I dragged the key down the side of the car, from the front to the back, careful to keep it hidden from view, just enough to make it look like an accident. The sound was like music to my ears. The deep scratch was like a physical manifestation of everything she had done to me. I didn't know if he would notice it right away, but I knew he'd be forced to deal with it soon enough. I didn't stick around to watch. I had already said what I needed to say. Even if I hadn't used a single word, my message was loud and clear. I went back to my car and drove off. The anger that had been burning inside me felt like it had been extinguished. It wasn't enough to completely erase the feeling of betrayal, but it was a start. I had done something, and that made me feel a little better. At least I had taken control back, in some small way. I knew the consequences were coming for him, and that was enough for me. The days that followed felt strange. I didn't know what to expect, and to be honest, part of me almost hoped he'd never notice the scratch. Maybe he'd just brush it off, claim it was an accident. Maybe he'd never even think it was intentional, and I'd get away with it, the ultimate silent revenge. I couldn't stop thinking about how long it would take for him to find it. Would he panic? Would he get angry? I almost wished I could be there to see it. But life didn't pause, just because I had taken matters into my own hands. Jenna's texts kept coming, like nothing had changed. She asked me how I was doing, asked me if I wanted to hang out, like we were still friends. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, I felt this wave of disgust wash over me. I knew exactly what she was doing, keeping me around, as some sort of safety net, while she was out there with him. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew what I'd done to his car. I thought about sending her a message, letting her know that I wasn't going to sit back and be treated like a fool. But then I realized I didn't need to. She'd find out on her own, soon enough. It wasn't until the fourth day after the scratch that I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a second, my heart skipping a beat. "Hey, this is Brad. We need to talk. I'm assuming you know what happened to my car." The anger rushed back into my chest, and my pulse quickened. Brad. That was his name. Of course it was. Of course. He'd have the audacity to text me after what I'd done. I wanted to ignore it, leave him hanging, but I couldn't. I had to respond. I had to let him know that I wasn't some passive bystander in this twisted little love triangle. I had to show him that I wasn't afraid of whatever confrontation was coming. I took a deep breath, then typed out a response. "Yeah, I know. Seems like you've got a problem with your car. Hope it doesn't cost you too much to fix." It was a simple reply, but there was a coldness to it that felt right. I didn't want to waste time on pleasantries. I wanted him to know that I wasn't backing down. If he wanted to talk, he'd have to face the reality of what had been done to him and why. The response came a few minutes later. "Listen, man, I'm not sure what your deal is, but we need to sort this out. Jenna told me about you, and I get it. You're hurt. But vandalizing my car is not the way to handle this. I chuckled a little at his words. Not the way to handle this. As if he was the one who had any right to lecture me. He was the one who had come into my life and torn everything apart. I wasn't the one playing both sides here. I almost laughed at his pathetic attempt to rationalize. I didn't care what he thought anymore. I didn't care about his feelings. He had no idea what it was like to be on the other side of this, to be in my shoes, with my world turned upside down because of his actions. He had no idea what it felt like to have someone you thought you knew, someone you loved, betray you like that. Jenna's told you about me? How cute. I'm sure she painted a pretty picture for you. I shot back. You have no idea what's really going on, Brad. But I don't really care to explain it to you. You'll figure it out eventually. I didn't wait for a response this time. I didn't need to. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my fingers were shaking, but there was a feeling of satisfaction I couldn't deny. I didn't know if I would ever fully get the closure I wanted, but for that moment, I felt like I had a little bit of control back. The next day, I ran into Jenna. She texted me asking if I wanted to meet up, and part of me considered ignoring her, but another part of me knew I couldn't just let this hang in the air. Not after everything. I agreed to meet her at the same cafe where I had seen her with Brad. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at the same table, sipping coffee, her smile as bright as ever. As soon as she saw me, her face lit up, and she waved. I could tell she was trying to act like everything was fine, like we could just pick up where we left off. She didn't know what had happened yet, and I wasn't sure if I should be the one to tell her. I figured I'd let her stew on it a little longer. She greeted me with that overly familiar tone. Hey you. Long time no see. How's everything? I sat down across from her, watching her as she tried to make small talk, but I wasn't listening. My mind was elsewhere, on Brad, on the scratch, on the tension building between us. I could see the guilt in her eyes, even if she didn't say anything outright. She knew. She had to know. So, I saw you sent me that photo the other day. I said casually, my voice cold, testing her. She blinked, caught off guard, but quickly recovered. Oh, that? Yeah, it's a photo from the weekend. We were out hiking and just caught a nice view, you know. I couldn't help but smirk. I saw. You were at that bench again, huh? The same one we used to go to all the time. Funny how you two seem to have a thing for that spot. Her smile faltered for just a split second, and I saw it, her nervousness, her realization that I knew. She didn't say anything at first, and I could almost hear her brain scrambling for an excuse. I didn't mean to hurt you, okay? She said, a little too quickly. I needed time. I needed to figure things out. I let the silence sit between us for a moment, watching her shift uncomfortably. I wanted to laugh at how she was still trying to act like she was in the right, like I would just accept her excuses. I've got a funny feeling that figuring things out didn't involve me, I said, leaning back in my chair. Her face went pale. What do you mean? I said, taking my time. It didn't involve me, but it definitely involved Brad, huh? I watched her eyes widen. She didn't say anything, but the guilt was written all over her face now. She was cornered. Listen, I don't know why you thought you could play me like that. String me along while you're already with someone else. I took a deep breath. But I'm not going to pretend like I'm okay with it. Not anymore. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. Don't even try to make excuses. You made your choice, and now Brad has to deal with the consequences. Her eyes narrowed, and I could tell she was about to get defensive, but I wasn't done. Not yet. Brad's not the only one who's going to pay for what's been done here, I said, standing up from the table. But you'll find that out soon enough. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her stunned and speechless. For the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. The days after I met with Jenna were a blur. I couldn't shake the image of her face when I dropped the bomb about Brad. There was a moment, just a split second, where her expression shifted from defensive to something close to regret. But it was too late. She had made her choice, and no amount of guilt or half-hearted apologies could change that. I stayed away from her for a while. I didn't respond to her texts or calls. I knew she would try to apologize again, to explain herself, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. There was nothing she could say that would make what she did okay. Nothing. I didn't need her anymore. And honestly, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was better off without her. But that didn't mean the anger had gone away. It was still there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. I had made my peace with the fact that she was gone, but I wasn't done with Brad. Not by a long shot. I spent the next few days thinking about him. How smug he must have been. How little he understood what he had gotten himself into. He thought he was just taking what was rightfully mine, that he was getting some kind of prize in Jenna. But I knew better. He was a placeholder, someone who had no idea what he was really dealing with. And in my mind, he deserved to be taken down a peg. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when I got a call from a block number. My first thought was that it was Jenna trying to reach out again, but when I picked up, I heard a familiar voice on the other end. It was Brad. "Is this the guy?" he said, sounding all sorts of pissed off. "The one who decided to key my car." I didn't say anything at first, letting him stew. There was something about his voice, loud and brash, that pissed me off even more. He was acting like he had any right to be angry, like he wasn't the one who had stolen my life out from under me. "Yeah, it's me," I finally said, cool and calm, almost too calm. "Got a problem with it?" He paused for a second, clearly thrown off by my response. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. He was trying to figure out if I was serious or just bluffing. "What the hell is your problem?" he snapped. "I've been dealing with the repairs all week. That's hundreds of dollars down the drain, man. You think I'm just gonna let you get away with this?" I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window as I spoke. "I didn't do anything you didn't deserve." He let out a frustrated laugh. "You think I deserve that? What the hell are you even talking about? It's not like I knew you or anything. I don't even know you. And she..." He cut himself off, realizing he was about to say too much. "You don't know me, huh? I think you know a hell of a lot more about me than you realize," I said, my voice low but firm. "You just don't know what you're dealing with. You're so sure of yourself because you've got this shiny car and this girl, but you don't know the half of it. You don't know what it feels like to get your heart ripped out and stomped on like that." Brad was quiet for a moment, probably trying to make sense of what I was saying. "I didn't know you two were still close. I didn't know anything about you until recently," he said, the anger in his voice slipping a little. "But that doesn't give you the right to." "I don't care what you think," I interrupted him, my words sharp. "You've been playing around with my life, and now you've got to pay for it. You think I'm just some guy who's going to roll over and accept it? No way. You're going to learn what it means to mess with someone who's been through the same bullshit. Trust me." There was a long pause before he finally spoke again, his voice sounding much more resigned than it had been earlier. "So what now? You want me to pay you back for my car or something? You really think that's going to fix whatever problem you have with me?" It felt like a challenge, like he was daring me to take it further, to make him feel the weight of the damage I'd done. But I wasn't interested in playing by his rules anymore. "Just know that I'm not done with you, Brad. I'm not looking for some quick fix. This goes deeper than that. You took something from me, and you'll pay for it in ways you don't even understand yet." And with that, I hung up. For a few days, things were quiet. I kept checking my phone, waiting for more messages from either Brad or Jenna, but they didn't come. I knew Brad was probably waiting for me to make the next move, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing I was thinking about him. I was in control now, not him. But then, on Saturday afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. It was Brad. "Hey," the message started. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm taking this to the police. I've got your number, and I'm sure I can track you down. This is crossing the line." I couldn't help but laugh. Crossing the line? Really? He was going to get the police involved? As if that would do anything. I had covered my tracks well. No cameras, no witnesses, no obvious signs of intentional damage. The car had been scratched in a way that could easily be mistaken for a random act of vandalism, not some personal vendetta. He had no case. But it didn't matter. He was scared, and that was all I needed to know. I didn't reply to his message. Instead, I sent a text to Jenna. I wasn't going to play games anymore. She had to know the truth. She had to understand what kind of person she was with. She had to know that this wasn't just some casual thing for me. What she had done mattered. And Brad needed to understand that his little fantasy world was about to come crashing down. Hey, Jenna, I typed. You and Brad are really something, huh? It's funny how people think they can just walk in and take what doesn't belong to them. He'll figure it out soon enough. I hit send, watching the words disappear into the ether. There was no turning back now. The message was clear, and I knew they'd both feel it sooner or later. Brad would learn that actions have consequences, and Jenna would see exactly what kind of man I could be when pushed too far. The tension was palpable after that. I kept waiting for something to happen, anything. I knew Brad would take it a step further, maybe even involve the cops like he had threatened. But there was something about him that made me feel like he was all talk. I wasn't worried. Not anymore. I had the upper hand, and I could feel the weight of the control I'd taken back. Jenna. I knew she was confused, probably conflicted between guilt and excitement, torn between two worlds that were about to collide. But it was a week later when the first real ripple hit. The call came in the middle of the afternoon, the kind of call I wasn't expecting, and it threw me completely off balance. It wasn't from Brad or Jenna. This time, it was the police. I didn't even recognize the number at first, but when the voice on the other end introduced himself as Officer Ramirez, my stomach dropped. "Mr. Carter?" he asked, like he was reading from a script. I could hear the formal tone in his voice, and I braced myself. I knew what was coming. He'd found me. Brad had called the cops, and now I was about to pay the price for the small, but meaningful act of revenge I'd taken. Yeah, this is him. What's this about? I tried to sound calm, but my mind was racing, trying to piece together how much trouble I was in. The scratch on Brad's car wasn't something I thought would bring the law into play. I had been careful, but hearing that cop's voice on the other end meant I was about to be dragged into something I hadn't planned for. Look, I'm going to get right to the point. We've had a report filed by a Mr. Brad Harris. He claims that his vehicle was intentionally damaged, and we have reason to believe the damage was more than just random vandalism. It appears someone knew exactly where to key the car in a way that wouldn't be immediately obvious. I felt my pulse race as he spoke, my throat tightening. I knew this moment was coming. I had expected it in some form, but hearing it from an officer felt surreal. "Did Mr. Harris give you my name?" I asked, trying to keep the shakiness out of my voice. "Yes, Mr. Harris identified you. We're just looking for your side of the story," Officer Ramirez replied, his voice almost too neutral, like he didn't want to pass judgment yet. But it was clear he had already made up his mind. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mixture of panic and defiance. "I'm sorry, officer. I don't know what Mr. Harris is talking about. I've never damaged his car. I don't even know him personally. I'm not sure why he would say that." I couldn't believe I was lying. It felt wrong, but at the same time, I had to protect myself. I had already made my peace with the fact that I'd keyed the car, but I wasn't going to just confess to it over the phone, not when I was still playing my cards. Officer Ramirez didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press me for any further details either. Instead, he shifted gears, trying a different angle. "We'll need you to come down to the station for a brief interview. It's just a formality. If you didn't do it, then there's no reason to worry. We just want to make sure everything is clear." I felt the blood drain from my face. Formality. That was a joke. I knew exactly what he was doing. They were trying to bait me, trying to get me to slip up, to admit something I wasn't ready to own up to. If I went down there, it was game over. I needed time to think. I couldn't go to the station. Not yet. "I'm not sure what you're asking, officer," I said, trying to sound as innocent as I could. "I don't have any involvement with Mr. Harris's car. I'm happy to provide any details you need, but I think you're looking in the wrong direction." There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear the soft sound of paper shuffling. Finally, Officer Ramirez spoke again, his tone shifting ever so slightly. "I'm not accusing you of anything yet, Mr. Carter, but I'll be frank with you, we won't be following up on this. If you're lying, or if you're withholding information, it's only going to make things harder for you down the line." It felt like a threat. An implied threat. He wasn't directly accusing me, but it was clear the net was tightening. I needed to act fast. I'll be happy to speak with you more, officer, but I think we can clear this up without me having to come down there. If you need any documentation, I can provide it. I've got nothing to hide. He seemed satisfied with that. All right, Mr. Carter. We'll be in touch. But I'll remind you, cooperation is important in these situations. If we find out you're lying to us. I'm not lying. I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. I'm telling you the truth. And if Mr. Harris wants to make accusations, he'll need to prove them. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding. That was too close. I sat there in silence, my mind racing. What the hell was Brad thinking? Did he honestly believe that going to the cops would solve anything? He had no real proof, and I had covered my tracks. But the fact that the police were involved now changed everything. I had to be more careful. I reached for my phone and sent a quick message to Jenna. I wasn't sure why I felt like I needed to involve her now, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning. I needed her to understand just how deep things were getting. Hey, Jenna. Looks like Brad went and involved the cops. I'm not sure what he's thinking, but I wanted to let you know in case he starts trying to drag you into this mess. You've got to realize that I'm not the only one who's going to be affected by his choices. I hit send, then stared at the screen for a few moments. What was I trying to accomplish? Was this my way of letting her know that she had lost all control over the situation? Maybe. But part of me wanted her to see the consequences of what she had done, to feel the weight of it all. It didn't take long for her to respond. Her message was brief but sharp. What the hell did you do? You didn't have to go that far. Now you've got the cops involved, and it's only going to make things worse for both of us. I wanted to snap back, to tell her that she had no idea what it felt like to be the one who was betrayed, but I held myself back. I couldn't let her control the narrative anymore. The situation had already spiraled out of control, and at this point, there was no turning back. The only thing left to do now was wait, and make sure that Brad felt every ounce of pressure I had put on him. He thought he could threaten me, but he had no idea who he was messing with. The game had changed, and I was in it to win. It felt like everything was spiraling out of control, and yet, I couldn't help but feel like it was all leading to this moment. Brad had gone to the cops. Jenna was still trying to play both sides, and I was caught in the middle of their mess. But I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about making them understand the cost of their actions. I didn't expect Brad to show up at my door, not this soon. But when the knock came that evening, my gut told me it was him. I opened the door to find Brad standing there, looking pissed but also a little desperate. He wasn't the cocky, self-assured guy I had seen around Jenna. This time, he was rattled. "Brad," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though I wanted to laugh at how predictable this whole thing had become. "What brings you by?" He didn't mince words. "You think you're the only one who can make things happen. I've had enough of your little game, man. This needs to stop." I leaned against the doorframe, pretending to be relaxed. "Oh, it needs to stop? Funny, because I was just thinking the same thing. You took something from me, Brad. You came into my life, acted like you could just waltz in and take what you wanted. Now, you want to make my life hell." Brad took a step forward, fists clenched. "You think I don't have problems of my own? You think I can just fix this? You've messed with the wrong guy." I stared at him, unimpressed. "I didn't mess with anyone. You and Jenna did this. I'm just making sure you both understand the consequences of your actions." Brad opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off. "And you'll understand soon enough. It's not just a keyed car, Brad. It's everything you've taken from me. And now, I'm making sure you feel it." He took a deep breath, stepping back, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But before he could say anything else, the doorbell rang. I didn't have to check the peephole to know who it was. Officer Ramirez, the same cop who'd called me days ago. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking like he didn't belong in the middle of this mess. "Mr. Carter?" Officer Ramirez asked, glancing from me to Brad. "We need to have a word with both of you." Brad's face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before, fear. He looked at me, then back at the officer, his bravado crumbling. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't in control anymore. "What's going on?" Brad demanded, his voice shaky. Officer Ramirez, calm as ever, turned to Brad. "We've received conflicting statements. We're investigating the damages to your vehicle, and we need both of you to cooperate." I stepped aside, letting the officer into the room, watching as Brad shifted uncomfortably. I could almost feel him spiraling, realizing this was no longer a small, petty thing. He was in too deep now. I looked at Brad one last time. "This is real, man. You're not in control anymore. You thought you could mess with me, but now the tables have turned. And believe me, this is only the beginning." Brad was silent. The officer began to ask questions, and I could tell Brad was struggling. The weight of the situation had finally hit him. He knew he couldn't talk his way out of this. The night ended with nothing conclusive, no charges, no arrests, but that wasn't the point. The real victory wasn't in what the cops could prove. It was in watching Brad realize that his shiny car, his life with Jenna, his false sense of security, none of it mattered anymore. Brad left without saying a word, and I knew the game was over. He was no longer the one calling the shots. A few weeks passed, and things slowly went back to normal. I didn't hear from Jenna or Brad much after that. The silence was almost comforting. The final chapter was written, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I had gotten my revenge, not through grand gestures, but through something far more satisfying. I made them feel the consequences of their actions, and that was enough.